Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, one of the things we like doing, we like seeing comments on our channel. We did see a few or
Yes.
a couple videos that we did. We always appreciate those, whether positive or negative. So thank you guys for those who do comment. Um, Saw a couple recurring threads. Me and you did a video, well, a series of videos last week about some announcements that Marvel had made. They were
Oh, yes. Oh,
rewriting X-Men history to put Kamala Khan into events that she wasn't a part of, undoing the death of Gwen Stacy. And they kind of admitted that they treat comics more like an IP farm now instead of actually an independent thing. There's also been stuff like they're killing the Silver Surfer, and I believe there's rumors they're going to kill off Thor. You and I thought this was a really, really bad week for Marvel. However, there are some folks who did have some interesting comments, and we've seen these on a few videos. We thought just it would be cool to address kind of this trend and see whether we think it would work. And again, it's a few small folks that had the comments, but one thing people said is, do we believe nostalgia is blinding us towards things? Do we think that nostalgia towards the past, um, overvaluing what happened in the past, treating stories that took place 30 or 40 years ago like they're the gold standard and nothing can top them. Do we think that hurts modern comics? Do we think that modern comics may be better than we're giving it credit for, but we don't really appreciate it because we're always looking backwards? And I think one of the interesting things is we do see this happen in that you and I are both sports fans. I'll say this, like for me, the greatest basketball player of all time is Michael Jordan. Now, I think LeBron James is very, very good, but the conversation really is never really about is LeBron James great? It's always is he better than Jordan? And you kind of have the talk of him is never really appreciating what he's done. It's more, oh, but he's not Jordan. And so he almost always gets seen through the spectrum of he's good, but he's not that, instead of just appreciating that is good. I think you see a similar thing in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady happening as well, where no matter what they do, instead of just going, wow, that guy's amazing, there is kind of this nostalgic look of, yeah, but he's not this. And so I think we can examine that with comic books now. Do you think there is a possibility, Mike, that maybe our nostalgia for the past, our clinging to what was before, hurts the way we see these modern stories? Or do you think, no, these are just bad stories that would be bad stories anytime?
I definitely have an affinity for the older stories. Sometimes they're simpler. So I'm about 70-30. I'm always open to a good new story, but I think the main hangup is that the stories have gotten very convoluted, and like you and I have talked about this, they're not written to be read like they were back then. So it's two different things, like they're being written mostly with the corporate agendas to see if they can make a movie or
Video game,
TV show,
cartoon.
video game. And I guess that's all well and good. They keep printing my floppies, so I'm happy about that. And every once in a while they hit a home run, like with Conan and Titan and
Flash
you know
Gordon, and yeah,
Flash Gordon and all of my favorite new books, and Spider-Man.
Ultimate Spider-Man. Yeah.
The Ultimate Spider-Man is really really good, and the Ultimate Black Panther is also really really good. But you can tell in those stories there's a tinge of nostalgia mixed with the Ultimate Universe weirdness. There's that tinge of nostalgia that really hooks readers, and the sales prove the point. Like when you write stories in a vein more like that, of course, things are a little bit weird in the Spider-Man story. He wasn't a teenager with powers. It happened later in life. Uncle Ben's alive and all that, but it was all just really well done. But comics really aren't written like that very often in the modern day. And I think most of the fans do yearn for the older style of storytelling, both pictorially and literary. That was good, it was sound, and even the younger comic book buyers probably still understand what was lost, where we were, and where we are.
Yeah, I think I'm of two minds on it. Do I think there is some nostalgia at play that blinds us from some of the stuff now? Yeah, I do think you always naturally look back at things and think they're better than they were. Um, in my
It's so
mind,
man.
there's,
Yeah,
yeah.
I used to walk to school. Yeah, five
Well, no,
miles.
like,
You go both ways.
I
Yeah,
recently noticed this with the old X-Men cartoon. And while I still believe that's a great cartoon, when X-Men 97 debuted, my son and I decided we were going to watch the older episodes. There's some pretty rough episodes in there. Now, I think
yeah,
it's a great show for what it was. But
yeah.
if you had not made me go back and watch all of them, no, I would have. No, it was a masterpiece, man. Every Saturday, it was an amazing cartoon, right? Nostalgia blind, right? I used to. There used to be a channel called ESPN Classic that used to play old basketball games. I loved that channel, but I remember watching it in my 20s when that channel used to be around. I'd watch old Chicago Bulls games, and in my nostalgic brain, it's like, no, Michael Jordan like never missed a shot, right? And then you
Yeah,
watch a live game, it's like, oh, Michael Jordan missed like 14 shots that game. No, he's still amazing,
yeah.
but it's not, the veneer of like, oh my, he was perfect. He like never screwed up, is gone. And so I do think we do have a tendency to look back at older runs that maybe we haven't gone through in a while and just go, oh no, that was great. Right. I've noticed this with Batman and that like I have so many omnibuses and collections of Batman. There are some runs that aren't great that I would rip to shreds if they came out now. But I read them when I was 16, 17 years old. And you're like, that was pretty good. Like it felt like Batman. And so I think there is things that I think from our nostalgic part, we don't critique the way that we would now. I think the most stark example, and I think I brought this up on another video, but Harley Quinn on the Batman the Animated Series. If that
Yes.
debuted now, we would rip it to shreds.
It's a
When it
very good
debuted
analogy.
then,
Very good.
right? When it debuted, and again, I do think Harley on the animated series is an incredibly great character, was incredibly well written. Part of the masterpiece of that show with Deanie and Tim is how well they integrated that. But if they made a new animated series now and said we are bringing in a female clown sidekick for Joker, people, all the predictable, this is woke and stupid, and why do we need a girl Joker? And this is just a way to make a girl boss character and all that. And again, I do think if they wrote it as well as they did now, we may not keep there, but there would be a segment of people now
The
who love
instant
that
backlash.
character who would go,
Yeah,
this is stupid. Why are we even doing this? Right. I look at the 90s Spider-Man show that I think is like amazing. That was one of my favorite cartoons. There's a lot of changes they make. Felicia Hardy's not really accurate to who she'd be. If they did that on this Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show, I'd be like, what is this junk? Why are we doing this? Don't they
yeah.
understand the characters? And we gave it the benefit of the doubt back then. So I do think, yes, there is some nostalgia. Where I would argue against it and where I would ultimately say I do believe the older content is better, though. What I am always amazed at, because I basically break my comic budget into, I have once a month I will buy an old omnibus, and then the rest of the time I buy new comic books. When I go back and read older omnibuses, even random omnibuses, like there was the Thing omnibus from his solo series in the 80s, I am always amazed at the detail, the depth, how consistent it is. And over 36 issues that very rarely do you see a different artist, a different
To be
writer,
consistent.
fill-ins or anything like that. And I think that is what we are more yearning for as audiences is the idea that stuff builds. I think what we've entered into with modern comic books is we are in a circular thing with all of these characters. And some folks say, well, we'll read that's because Spider-Man's been around 60 years, so what can you really do? Well, I think the issue is Peter Parker used to age. Like a lot of these characters, while we love them, yes, it's 2 years for every 10. But Peter was in high school for a bit, and then he was in college, and that was probably what the 70s. He was his
Yeah,
college period. In the 80s, he kind of seemed to get out of college and be more about a young adult kind of thing.
right.
90s, he was married, and it seemed like they were growing him up. And then, like it's somewhere around 2006, 2007, they just decided, no, it's time to hit the reset button. And Peter really has been like 28 since then for like 30 years now, almost 12, 18, 19 years. Peter feels like he's the same exact age. Get close to Mary Jane, don't do it. Get close to Mary Jane, don't do it. Back with Black Cat, nah. Back with Black Cat, nah. Has a job, doesn't have a job. And it's just, they haven't grown the character up anymore. In contrast, I think characters that people are still invested in. Nightwing has grown. Nightwing has, as a character, there is a very clear thing of yes, he's been around 80 years, but Nightwing now feels kind of like a 30-year-old. Wally West kind of feels like a
Wally
30-year-old.
West. Yeah.
Wally's a father with kids, and his kids are growing, and they have story arcs and stuff. And so, if you read the story of Wally West as a modern comic fan, well, I don't like the Flash one right now. I do see why fans would still be invested. I think this endless kind of treadmill that they have of we can't let Peter grow, we can't let like Steve Rogers, right? You want to make Sam Wilson Falcon? Get Steve Rogers married. Have Steve Rogers marry Sharon Carter, grow old a little bit, and evolve. Like, give it a try. I think that's the thing we don't do anymore. The older comics at least had the veneer of it, or at least you kind of believed it, was that the story's moving forward, right? Bruce aged slow, but you did feel like Bruce was a 25-year-old playboy, and then it kind of felt like Bruce was in his early 40s. And then it all kind of like stopped and reset. And I think that is what nostalgia isn't hurting us on. I think they no longer want to push the characters forward, even at an incrementally slow rate like they used to.
I think they're really, they're probably a little nervous to pull the trigger on that. And now they have a whole bunch of new bosses to report to. Back in the day, it was just, a couple of floors on an office building in lower Manhattan. And, you had the boss still smoked a cigar in his office. The artist pools were, it was a different world.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just coming up with great ideas. They were hitting home runs all the time. But now we've got the pressure of $1 billion property.
It's
It's
a
on the line,
multi-platform property instead of a
and then
story in a comic book.
and somebody else tells you what to do, and they sign your check.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I hope would change that I think would end this with the competition they get from manga now, where manga does tell stories that evolve and have an end point. Like there's some that have gone on for a long time, like One Piece, but even that, like the guy, I think his name's Oda or whoever who writes it, he's basically said like, no, there's an end point. This is, it's an older book, but I have the end in mind. I do think maybe we need to at least give it a try to age these characters slowly to maybe get to a point where maybe over the next decade, Bruce does become like a 50-year-old. And then you could evolve. And I think what that could do is two things. I do think it would start giving comic book fans an opportunity to see these characters age and tell different types of stories. I think a mid 40s, early 50s Batman that was still Batman, not like a Dark Knight Returns, cryptic, tortured future version, but just simply like in the main DC universe, Batman is now 50, right? And seeing Dick Grayson step into the role, maybe Batman has to change his tactics and use more tech, like lean towards that Batman Beyond kind of
Batman
thing.
Beyond was
I
cool.
think that would be interesting to see. And then it would truly make your Supermans, your Wonder Womans, your Thors, who are immortal, different because they would see those characters age and grow and they wouldn't. And I do think what I will say, you pointed out the Ultimate Spider-Man comic book, you pointed out Ultimate Black Panther. I think even though I'm not a huge fan of a couple of the absolute ones they're still doing, I still have enough interest in those to pick those up. I do think if those kind of start with an endpoint in mind, I think that could give comic books a chance because I think that is where nostalgia, I think, doesn't affect new comic books is. I just think the reading and story habits of people have changed. And I think that's why we're less satisfied as it used to felt like this stuff was building towards something. Now it seems endless. And so I do
And
think if
but
you
you can
had an
check off
end point, it might work.
you can check off the boxes with let's take a look at Ultimate Spider-Man. It has one of the things that makes it successful is it has a tinge of nostalgia because Peter's married with kids, so you
Yep.
recognize that
Like this
part
is
of,
where the Peter was
yeah,
going had they not
yeah,
reset the button.
and it kind of picks that up there, and then you have good talent on there on the book, and there's obviously an arc in mind, and they probably thought if it doesn't work, it'll go 24 issues, but if it works, we're going to build it out this way, and it can go for 2 years or more, or however long it
Yeah.
goes. So I do think there was an arc in mind, and it was just good storytelling, and that's what they had to do. And those guys in the 60s and 70s and before, they had to hustle, so they put out their best work all the time, for the most part.
One, and I
uh,
think I think if they did allow for some endpoints and things, it would get us more invested in these series a little bit because then whether it was a well-written thing or not, at least it counted. I think
yeah.
that's the hardest part with stuff now is, and I've probably seen this with Iron Man more than any character. Like I've been collecting him for like 20
Oh
years
yeah.
now. Iron Man, they hit the reset button all the time. It's like, man, did any of the last run even count? Like I didn't really enjoy the last run, but I did read it. Like
Yeah.
there was some, and then you read the next issue, and it's like, okay, so did any of that matter? Like and I think that's the thing is at the very least, I think that's why the MCU somewhat worked initially, was it did feel like it was a journey and tone. Like one of the coolest things, like what I love about the MCU, and I go back and rewatch, is Downey Jr.'s accumulation of injuries that he has Tony have throughout the series. And that if you
Yeah.
watch Tony Stark, like in the early, by the end of the thing, he's always grabbing his wrist because he hurts his wrists in a movie. And then like you can just tell he gets older, and like it's a small thing, but as a viewer, it's a really cool detail that you pick up on that like that happened. And I think there's just been checkpoints in the last couple of years where I feel like if there was more long term storytelling in mind, like when Tom King was going to have Batman marry Catwoman, that would have been a seminal thing in terms of even if you hated Tom King's run, you can't question it had an impact, right? If we were dealing with 5 years later, there's a married Batman in continuity. You'd be like, well, that mattered. That counted. Like at least it meant instead you look at it now, if you hated the run, then you just had bad comic books. And even if you liked it, it built towards nothing and it's largely almost forgotten and ignored. Right? Same way Chip Zdarsky did an event where Batman had his hand cut off. And you're like, okay, I didn't
Oh
love
yeah, I
the
remember that one.
story, but I'm like, if Batman's got a robotic hand for the next 20 years of continuity, I will at least remember that story and be like, oh yeah, when Bruce lost his hand. They don't even do that anymore. And so I think that yes, nostalgia does blind us to some things, but I do think comic books have to, for all the risks they'll take, like rewriting giant size X-Men to put Kamala Khan in it,
Mm,
take some risks and let the character. And I think that is where the Ultimate Universe might work because they are letting the books run in real time. And so what will be interesting is if Hickman stays on Spider-Man and Brian Hill stays on Black Panther, if those things would run 50, 60 issues and they truly have that Peter is 6 years older and in his early 40s
yeah.
in like 60 issues, and his kids are going to college and getting older and stuff. I think that would at least for new readers and for older readers feel like, wow, I'm reading something that evolves, that changes the way that manga does, right? And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I've talked to my kid about is like he loves One Piece and Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that because he's like, no, like who and I think what's his name, Goku in Dragon. He grows, he's
Yeah.
not young anymore. Like there's stories, there's checkpoints, there's things that matter. Sure, there's little retcons here and there, but he feels like no. When I read that first volume, that was that era, and now it's in a new era, and I still like it. And I think comics have got to get to that place where I think that's how you could escape some of the nostalgia is if you at least had where, hey, we're growing Spider-Man. We're going to let him get married and have kids. And then I think what would happen too is a lot of these characters who feel redundant, you'd kind of have, okay, well, Peter's the old Spider-Man. Miles is your young teenage Spider-Man now. So if you want those type of stories, you got him. But Peter has moved forward. And I think that might help quite a bit. And it would eliminate a lot of the stupidities, I think, of like, okay, Kitty Pryde was like 14 and she's now like almost 30, I think, in the comics. But Cyclops has been like 32 for like since the 80s. Like it's time for like you can't have that some people grow and others don't. And so I think if they at least grew everybody, it might help. That would be my kind of thing. But overall, if you had to say yes, no, Mike, do you think nostalgia hurts the way people see comics now, or do you think it's just the storytelling is the storytelling and it wouldn't matter?
I think everybody looks back with rose tinted glasses, from time to time, and we yeah, and like you said, sometimes you pick up an old book or watch an old show, and it's like, oh, that was really bad. Like sometimes I'll revisit the old Flash show, but
Yeah,
it was for years for a Flash fan that was like the high water mark, right?
yeah.
And so yeah, and I'll have to revisit the newer Flash show, some of the episodes. I think I may have a little more appreciation for them, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I definitely think it does hurt the stories. I think they hurt themselves with poorly written stories and things like that now, and bad ideas. But I do think also nostalgia is a fact. I think it would be incorrect to say that nostalgia does. And that, like, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, what's one of the best runs of Batman? I'd have been, oh, Grant Morrison's Batman. I used to think, I thought that was amazing. I still like it. But I recently reread my issues and I saw some good deals on the omnibus of it, and I'm like, let me buy this. While I still enjoyed it, I was a bit like, oh, this would have driven me crazy had it come out
Right?
today. Because he
Yeah.
retcons certain things about Talia, and instead of
Right?
Bruce's relationship being that he was in love with Talia and they had a kid, they make it more like she kind of took advantage. And I'm like, this would have infuriated me if it
Oh,
came out today.
you know it would have.
But
All over
back
the
then,
internet.
I read it and I wasn't as, even though I had been reading Batman comics my whole life, I kind of just went with it. Whereas if that issue came out tomorrow in a brand new #1, like, we're giving him a new kid. He has a kid out of wedlock with Talia. What is this? Is awful. This writer is so disrespectful and stupid. And like, you'd go off. And so I think there is some of that. And that I do think we forgive things from, and I look, there's been people who've criticized Grant Morrison before, so I'm not going to say that hasn't been how some people do it, but I even notice in myself, there are things that I liked, thought were good, that if they did it today, I'd be on here doing one of these rant videos about, can you believe they ruined Batman? And so I do think nostalgia does at least play. I think it's probably a 50-50 or maybe 70-30, like you said. I think it's a
Yeah.
part of it. As always, though, it's interesting for us to let us know what you guys think below. Do you think nostalgia is why we appreciate older comics more and kind of are so harsh on the new ones? Or do you think it's just the new ones failing on their own or just not connecting? As always, folks, let us know what you think. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.